the outcome in patients with advanced lung cancer. And we all know that. But many times, the intended benefit does not actually happen in a particular patient if we don't look after certain finer points. Besides the molecule and the dose, what is really important to focus on is the potential side effects and how to avoid them. As all of us know, the side effects of immunotherapy are different from those of standard cancer directed systemic therapy. And some of these side effects can be really detrimental to the patient's quality of life and outcome. So one of the aspects that we will discuss in today's webinar is how to optimize and make sure that the patient gets the full intended benefit while actually reducing the potential side effects that we have. The second part that is important is how we are moving to use of systemic care therapy in earlier stages. It is not just metastatic disease or stage 4 disease, but even in stage 3 disease, we are able to provide benefit of the treatment, especially immunotherapy, to our patients. Not only that, we have a potential to cure patients with stage 3A disease. And I think this is a huge achievement that has happened in the last few years. And understanding finer points of the same will help us in deciding how best to treat our patients. The third is experience sharing. What is there in theory may not be there in practical aspects, especially in our population because of pharmacogenomic variations. So there are certain side effects and certain effects that may be seen in patients in the Caucasian population, but their outcome or their incidence and frequency would be totally different in our patients. So these three things are really important besides the science and the survival curves and the data that will be discussed. We have to make sure that we provide the benefit to our patients in the real world. And therefore, we have to have this sort of interaction wherein experts, key opinion leaders, are able to share their personal experience. With this, I will stop my comments here. I hope that I have done the right contact setting, and I hand over the organizers for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll move on to the first session, and our first chairperson is none other than Dr. Sunil Kumar. He is the acting head of department at pulmonary medicine at Pacific Medical College and Hospital, Udaipur. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you, organizers, for inviting me to this webinar. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for the organizers for inviting me for this webinar. And without wasting any time, we will move to first session. And for this session, I will invite Dr. Ajay Singh, who is consultant medical oncologist in Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, who will deliver a lecture on role of biomarkers in lung cancer. So, Dr. Ajay Singh, over to you.
Thank you so very much, sir, and thank you to organizer to giving this opportunity. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, next slide, please. So today's my topic is the role of currently used biomarkers in lung cancer. And this will be the subheadings under which I am going to discuss the today's topic. So starting from the overview of and epidemiology, then how we characterize the lung cancer based on molecular, and then how this clinical genomic profiling aiding to the treatment of the lung cancer patient, followed by role of the clinical liquid biopsy in lung cancer patients, and then new treatment option based on these genomic profiles and biomarkers, and few case discussions. Next slide, please. So as we are aware, next slide, please. This lung cancer is one of the one slide back. Yes. So yeah, yes, same. So lung cancer is one of the most common diseases in the world. When we combine both sexes, So it will be the most common disease diagnosed all over the world, including India. And over time, based on the awareness, though the smoking has decreased, but still our technology has improved, and still the overall detection rate of the lung cancer is static. And lung cancer is one of the disease which is the most common cause of cancer associated mortality. Next slide, please. So uh, w- when we come to the lung cancer diagnosis, we know that initially, based on the morphology, we classified lung cancer as a non-small cell or small cell, and further small cell was characterized as large cell or carcinoid, and this non-small cell was classified as squamous cell and non-squamous, including adenocarcinoma, large cell carcinoma. Next slide, please. And the main purpose of this, there was some implication related to therapy, that in squamous cell we can avoiding bevacizumab, which may cause hemoptysis, which may be life-threatening. So this was the slight implication of the initial classification of the lung cancer based on only morphology. And in addition to the morphology, there was ISC, which was helping in deciding whether it's adenocarcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, but it was not so accurate. Next slide, please. So this be previous slide, please. I think there is some one more back, one more previous, one more. Actually, it's very okay. So we'll just continue from okay. So based on now you're having the improved technology, and we are able to identify multiple mutations, and based on these mutations, we are now able to classify lung cancer molecularly into the very heterogeneous disease. Next slide, please. So you can see that there are different mutations. Next slide, please. Next slide. Previous there is pie chart wala picture. Slide is not.
So just 1 minute, sir. I'll just reshare the slides.
Start from that pie chart of the
Yeah,
mutations.
Is this the correct slide, sir?
No.
So this is the slide. Then after that, this is the next slide.
Next,
After this is this one.
Previous.
So just give me 1 minute. Sir, is this the slide you're referring to?
Yeah, means there was one more before this, but this is also so based on now this different molecular markers, we are now able to classify lung into a very heterogeneous disease. So among these, a few are very common: EGFR, ALK, and ROS, and there are many other mutations, including RET, MET, NTRK. So overall, if you see the incidence of these mutations, EGFR is one of the most common, which in Western population accounting from 15% to 20%, and when it comes to Asian, it may go up to the 29% or to 30%, and in some places it may be up to 35%. And when we come to Indian population, we have data from Tata, we shown that the mutation rate in Indian population for EGFR was approximately 23%. And similarly for ALK, it may be range from 5 to 7%. So then other mutations may range from 1 to 5%, and few rare mutations which are less than 1%. So overall, if you see if you count all mutations, so maybe approximately 40 to 50% patients are having some form of mutation, which is targetable by some therapeutic approach. Next slide, please. So when we come to these mutation therapeutic approaches, so you can see that now in current era, for each mutation, now we are having multiple approved drugs, and there are many other drugs which are still under investigation, but primary results of few drugs are available. which are showing very promising results, and maybe in coming time these may be the this maybe make the so for coming first for the EGFR, we know that from first generation Gefitinib, Erlotinib, we move on to Afatinib, Dacomatinib, and now we are currently using Osimertinib, which has shown change our current practice from advanced disease, metastatic disease to even in curable disease. We are using it in adjuvant setting, and now trials are going on in even in neoadjuvant setting. Similarly, for ALK also from first generation Crizotinib to second generation Alectinib and Seritinib, and now we are having a third generation drugs Lorlatinib, which are showing a remarkable responses and improvement in the OS and DFS. Similarly, you can see the for all the drugs, even in NTRK mutations or MET mutations, there are multiple options in current era, which from all endpoint, from response rate to disease control rate, duration of control rate, and progression free interval and overall survival. We are seeing a remarkable benefit in all these patients who are having some form of mutations. Next slide, please. Next, please. Next, please. So when we come to the how we diagnose, means how we can diagnose the by which methods. So there are a few basic methods, either by ISC or by RT-PCR. But still, approximately there was approximately in the range of 20 to 25% we are not able to diagnose those patients. And now with the current availability of NGS, these when we compare with the previous method, we are able to diagnose 20% patients who are falsely labeled as a negative for any of these mutations. Next slide, please. So these are the few studies conducted in population-based data, and you can see that uh, uh, by this comprehensive genomic profiling, there was approximately in both these studies, 22% and 21% patients were diagnosed with the mutations who were initially diagnosed as a negative with our primary ISC or PCR-based methods. Next slide, please. Similarly, in ALK also, you can see that significant proportion of patients who were initially labeled as false negative, and later with the comprehensive genomic profile using NGS, they were 35% patients were later tested to be positive, and significant proportion of these patients have received approximately 80% have received treatment based on the results of the NGS, and they were having a significant benefit. Next slide, please. Similarly, when the data, observation data from the real world, say approximately 6,500 patients who were analyzed, approximately 22% patients were found to have some targetable mutations based on the the advanced means NGS based technique, and approximately significant proportion patients received the treatment based on the NGS report, approximately 60%. Either they were diagnosed based on liquid based methods or tissue based comprehensive genomic profiling. Next slide, please. Next, so basic this information for what we get from this is the doing a comprehensive genomic profile saves the time, and we can avoid the exhaustion of the tissue. Sometimes we may have a depleted tissue, and if we exhaust this tissue in different methods, and we miss this important information regarding the genomic profile of the patients. So this by doing NGS, we are able to see all the molecular profiling in a rapid time and in a comprehensive manner. Next slide, please. So right now we are having a ISC and RT-PCR which are limited to some specific mutation we are knowing. So now with the based on this comprehensive genomic profile, we are able to diagnose even rare mutations. Next slide, please. This was the MET exon 14 skipping mutations. Initially, by ISC or RT-PCR, we are just able to make the diagnosis of MET amplification or this copy number alteration. Now with the next slide, please. With this NGS method, we are able to identify this MET exon skipping 14 mutations also. And the significance of this was shown in the geometry trial, where patients who were MET exon 14 mutation were treated with capmatinib has shown significant response. So if you saw the patient who were either treatment naive or who were previously treated, shown a response rate in the range of 70% and 40% respectively, with the median duration of response approximately 11 months and 9.7 months. Next slide, please. And similarly, this capmatinib has shown means this similar proportion of response and control of the disease in MET amplified patients also. Next slide, please. So in addition to this capmatinib, in profile 1001 trial, again crizotinib was studied, and this was a phase 1 trial in patients who are having MET exon 14 skipping mutation. And the primary endpoint of this study was the overall response rate. And similarly, you can see this water plot diagram. Overall response rate was approximately 32% who were treated, who were previously treated patients. And out of this, 5% patient had a complete response and 28% patient had a partial response, and 45% patient had a stable disease. So overall median duration of response was 9.1 months, with the median OS was 20.5 months, and 12 months OS probability was 70%. Next slide, please. Similarly, in addition, this next drug was the tepotinib. Again, in Vision phase 2 trial, it has shown a significant overall response rate for N, as well as the duration of response and OS benefit with the tepotinib. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Similarly, another rare mutation was the rate alteration. Next slide, please. In this Loxo 292 trial, the sulfactinib has shown a tremendous overall response rate of 70%, and either by investigator or 64% by independent reviewer. And the median duration of response was a tremendous 17.5 months. Next slide, please. And not only this extracranial the control disease, even the intracranial response rate was also very high. So sulfactinib has shown this durable response even in intracranial cranial lesions, and the median duration of that response was approximately 9.4 months. Next slide, please. So after this, then came this Arrow trial. In this, pralsetinib has shown even more higher response rate of approximately 96%, and with 6% CR rate. And out of this 12, and in treatment naive, it has shown CR rate of 12%. And it has also has as similar to the sulfactinib, even higher rate of intracranial response rate of 56%, and out of those 56% who responded, 33% has shown CR in intracranial lesions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Similarly, this again, when we come to EGFR, there was few rare mutations in exon 20 insertion, other than the common mutations which we see in the exon 19 or exon 21. These were the few rare mutations which were detected based on the NGS method. And now in current era, we are having a few different drugs available for these different types of 20 insertions. Next slide, please. So, as we are already aware, the ADAURA trial has one of the landmark trial, which has not changed our current practice. And this was basically for patients who are resectable phase 1 to 3A patients with lung NSCLC, and who were treated with curative intent, and after that they were randomized to either 3 years of osimertinib or placebo based. And till now the DFS data is very remarkable, and with approximately 65% of approximately 65% patient having disease control DFS for at 4 years, as opposed to only 20% patient in placebo arm. OS data is yet to mature, but now based on this data, approximately whoever patient is able to afford the osimertinib, this is our the uh, current practice to offer them the osimertinib. Next slide, please. Similarly, this in subgroup analysis in FLORA trial, they have shown the this response monitoring with the liquid biopsy. Patient who has a clearance of the this EGFR mutations with at 6 weeks, these patients have shown better disease control as compared to the patient who had a mutation detected at 6 weeks. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Similarly, when we come to this KRAS mutation, again this liquid biopsy methods uh, this was the data in 80,000 patients to detect the these different KRAS mutations in different sets of tumor, and in this data the liquid biopsy has shown the one of the common where these KRAS mutations were found in the basically non-small cell lung cancer, either non-squamous or squamous, approximately 5 to 7%. Then in similarly, which was found in other tumors also, but the frequency was very low, either bladder or breast or ovarian. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Similarly, based on these targets, next slide, please. This genomic and this lung cancer, now we are knowing that other than this target, immunotherapy is also playing a major game-changing role in patients who are not having any targetable mutations. So basically, this immunotherapy is currently we are having the drugs which are either blocking the PD-1 or PD-L1. The PD-L1 which is available means which is expressed by the tumor cells, blocks the T cell which is expressing the PD-1, so that it escape the killing effect of the our natural body system. Next slide, please. Starting from 2050 to current date, now we know we have a multiple this immunotherapy drugs from pembrolizumab, nivolumab, or atezolizumab, or durvalumab. Starting from the advanced diseases, now uh, in the second line onwards or third line onwards, now we are having the multiple data set from Keynote 24 or 42 and Checkmate. These were now is the major therapeutic options in patients in first line, whether they are expressing PD-L1 or not expressing PD-L1, either alone or in combination with the chemotherapy based on the different criteria. Next line, please. Next, please. Previous one. So there was the different biomarkers were attempted to uh, define the patients who may get the maximum benefit from this immunotherapy. So one of these was a PD-L1. As you see, in almost all studies, they have shown high PD-L1 expression was associated with a more response to PD-L1. But still, there are patients who 8% of patients who were, even though PD-L1 negative, had shown a good response to immune checkpoint inhibitors. But obviously, this is the one of the
Sir, sorry to
markers.
interrupt you, sir. We're running short of time, sir. Can I request you to conclude, sir?
Okay, next, we'll conclude. Next slide, please. So other than PD-L1, there is a tumor mutation burden again, which had given some hint. Those patients with a high tumor mutation burden, there are different these target in different studies. Some has kept as 10 tumor mutation burden, some has kept 20. So overall, about 10 was taken as a marker, which may show a favorable response to immune checkpoint inhibition. Next slide, please. This is again this tumor mutation burden in blood, which has shown even in blood if they keep the target as more than 20 tumor mutation burden, and in tissue it is more than 10 with a favorable response to immunotherapy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So these are all different studies for different drugs and showing the mutation, tumor mutation burden and response to immunotherapy. And in all studies, they are mostly showing with those with a high PD-L1 or tumor mutation burden showing a favorable response in with respect to disease control and OS. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. We just come to directly to studies because all those are these are the few cases. Next. Yes, these are the few cases where previous. Next. Okay, so this was a 49-year patient who was stage 3 treated with chemoradiotherapy, and then in October 2013, and then after 6 months she had a relapse with multiple brain, liver, and bone mets. And on this PCR-based method, exon 19 deletion was diagnosed, and she was given this radiotherapy for brain lesion followed by gefitinib, and then again she had progression. And EGFR again detected exon 19 deletion, and it was negative for T70. But when NGS did, it showed T790 mutation with some other mutations. And patient, next slide, please. And patient was treated with osimertinib. Again, she had a response, but again progression in some lesion. Then again, comprehensive panel was done, and in addition, 790 it has shown G to 7245 mutation, clonal evolution, and osimertinib was combined with afatinib, and again patient had a good response. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Previous one slide. Next. Okay,
Sir, yeah.
Okay, so we'll conclude. So these were some evidence, this data suggesting that how the current practice has changed based on the detection of these biomarkers, either EGFR, AL cross, or this for immunotherapy markers, either tumor mutation burden or PD-L1 burden, which has changed our current practice, and now they are either in systemic disease or curative setting. They have changed our current practice. With this, I conclude.
Thank you so much, sir. This session was sponsored by Roche. We will now move on to the next session. I'll hand over the mic to our chairperson, Dr. Sunil Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Singh, for this valuable information and presentation. Any questions from the audience?
Sir, due to want of time, can I request
Okay.
the audience to put it in the chat box, and I'll request our faculty to answer the questions? Sure.
So if you have any questions, you can just text me on question and answer segment. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Deepak Gupta, who is senior consultant in Department of Medical Oncology, Bhagwan Mahavir Cancer Hospital and Research Center, Jaipur, who will deliver the lecture on new era in the management of stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. So Dr. Deepak Gupta, now over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. This session is sponsored by AstraZeneca. Over to you, Deepak, sir.
Very good evening. I have been given the topic of new era in unresectable stage 3 NSCLCs. So, current management of unresectable locally advanced NSCLCs. So, approach to management of locally advanced stage unresectable NSCLC includes multidisciplinary teams, which includes pathologists, radiation, medical and oncologist, thoracic surgeon. So definitive treatment is definitive chemoradiotherapy for stage 3 unresectable NSCLC. May it be concurrent chemoradiation or maybe sequential chemoradiation. So guidelines also recommend that for unresectable N2 disease or N3 disease, so non-surgical multimodality treatment is the treatment of choice. So traditionally, intent of treatment in stage 3 setting is curative with chemoradiation. So chemotherapy regimens used with radiotherapy in NSCLCs are various type of regimes like cisplatin etoposide, pemetrexed and platinum, paclitaxel and carboplatin, and in sequential regimen also paclitaxel, carboplatin or cisplatin, vinblastine, in which median PFS has been in range of 9 to 10 months and median OS from ranging from 13 months to 25 months. Then outcomes for consolidation trial in locally advanced lung cancer. So there are various trials like consolidation docetaxel with platinum or pemetrexed with platinum. But the consolidation failed to improve the PFS and overall survival, as you can see hazard ratios. Similarly, additional dose of radiation therapy as a consolidation also failed to improve PFS and overall survival. Targeted therapies like gefitinib or cetuximab post CTRT also did not improve survival. So how we can improve outcomes? So either to add more chemotherapy like consolidation chemotherapy, add more radiation, or add a targeted therapy. But all three modalities are more toxic and their survival was not improved. So no FDA approved maintenance therapy following concurrent CTRT. And further manipulations of existing chemotherapy drugs are unlikely to provide substantial survival gains. So path forward will require newer approaches. So although stage 3 treatment with chemoradiation is curative intent, but 5-year overall survival is only 15 to 25% because most of the patient progress rapidly and their prognosis remains poor. So what's the role of immuno-oncology in unresectable NSCLCs? So Pacific trial was a phase 3 randomized trial to answer this question. It was a double-blind placebo-controlled multi-center trial in which patients of stage 3 locally advanced unresectable NSCLCs who have not progressed following CTRT were randomized in 2:1 fashion to durvalumab versus placebo. Inclusions were 18 years or older, PS 0 to 1, and estimated life expectancy of more than 12 weeks. Archived tissues was collected. Co-primary endpoint was PFS by central review, and key secondary endpoints were ORR, duration of response, safety and tolerability, and patient-related outcomes. So these are the baseline characteristics. Most of the patients were stage 3A or 3B. EGFR mutation was negative in 2/3 of patients and unknown in 1/3 of patients. PDL1 expression was approximately 40%, less than 25%. And more than 25% was seen in 25% of patients. 50-50 patients were divided into squamous and non-squamous, and induction chemotherapy was received by 1/4 of patients before CTRT. So prior CRT, most of the patients had received concurrent chemotherapy and radiation, 711 patients, and out of which 191, that is 26.8% of patients had received induction chemo also. So in previous trials, when concurrent CTRT was tested, so randomization was done at the start of CTRT. In consolidation studies, the randomization was immediately after CTRT, but in Pacific study, randomization was done up to 6 weeks of completion after completion of chemoradiation. So results updated 5-year overall survival and PFS in placebo-controlled phase 3 Pacific trial significantly improved PFS and OS in patient with unresectable stage 3 NSCLCs and no disease progression after CTRT. Like OS hazard ratio was 0.68 and PFS hazard ratio was 0.52. It exhibited a manageable safety profile and did not detrimentally affect patient-reported outcomes. These findings transformed the treatment landscape for unresectable stage 3 NSCLCs, and further updated analysis of OS and PFS was reported 5 years after last patient was randomized. So 5-year overall survival was 42.9% versus 33.4% with a hazard ratio of 0.72. And it was the first and only approved IO to demonstrate 42.9% overall survival at 5 years. And as a similar story with progression-free survival, you can see that 5-year PFS was 33.1% as compared to 19% with placebo. In both curves, OS and PFS, you can see that the curve starts separating from as early as 2 to 3 weeks, and they remain separated till the tail part of the curve. This was again first and only approved IO to show substantial and durable PFS of 33% at 5 years. So 2 years, 3 years, and 4-year data have previously reaffirmed the consistent and robust benefit of PACIFIC regimen. You can see the hazard ratios are well maintained at 2 year, 3 year, 4 years, and now 5-year survival. So 5-year data demonstrate that continued benefit of PACIFIC trial in those patients who get benefited. In subgroup analysis, durvalumab have shown OS benefit in all pre-specified subgroups. Although PD-L1 expression, more than 25% expression has more benefit, but irrespective of PD-L1, EGFR, and induction chemotherapy, or irrespective of response to CTRT, all patients were equally affected. And similar story was seen with PFS benefit. All pre-specified subgroup were equally benefited with durvalumab consolidation. First subsequent therapy after discontinuation of durvalumab, in 41% of patients in durvalumab arm and 54% of patients in placebo arm received a subsequent disease-related anti-cancer therapy, which included platinum doublet therapy, single-agent chemotherapy, immunotherapy, targeted therapy, radiation alone, and systemic therapies were the most common first subsequent anti-cancer treatment in both arms. These are the objective responses to the first subsequent systemic treatment. Definitive conclusions were not drawn from this, given the small sample size and large number of patients with non-evaluable or missing data. Patterns of disease progression. So first progression by location. New lesion identified within lung parenchyma or chest wall, including diaphragm, were categorized as intrathoracic and all other lesions extrathoracic. Reduced rate of first progression was seen with durvalumab, 45.4% versus placebo. There 64.6% first progression was seen. You can see in the table that intrathoracic disease only was seen in 36.6% as compared to 48% in placebo arm, and extrathoracic only disease was seen in 6.9% versus 13.1% with placebo. Pattern of disease progression. So you can see that durvalumab improved the time to intrathoracic progression when compared to placebo. It was 25.2 months with durvalumab versus only 9.2 months with placebo, with a hazard ratio of 0.55. New extrathoracic lesion progression, it was seen in 8.8% patient of durvalumab at first progression versus 16.5%, which is almost double as compared to durvalumab. You can see in the table that one lesion was seen in 4% versus 6.3%, two lesions in 1.9% versus 5.5%, and 3 to 5 lesion are also less in durvalumab arm. Safety, grade 3 or 4 toxicity or more or less similar in both durvalumab and placebo arm. Grade 5, 4.4 versus 6.4%. Leading to discontinuation was more with durvalumab, 15 months versus 9.8%. All grade pneumonitis or radiation pneumonitis was seen in 33% versus 24%, which is little higher with durvalumab. Safety summary based on the time from radiation. So within 14 days, durvalumab started, or more than 14 days. There's not much difference in toxicities based upon the duration. So when to start durvalumab after chemoradiation? Within 42 days, or it can be started after 42 days. So there is a first real life data on durvalumab after definitive CTRT in unresectable stage 3 NSCLCs, which is a French data. This is the flow chart. So patient with unresectable stage 3 NSCLC with no possibility to enter ongoing clinical trial and no disease progression following 2 or more prior cycle of CTRT. Performance status 0 to 1, and they were started on durvalumab within 42 days after the end of radiation. Major exclusion were grade 3 or 4 toxicities, pneumonitis, prior immunotherapy, and immune syndrome. Patient characteristics were more or less similar as compared to PACIFIC trial. At the end of concurrent chemoradiotherapy, RECIST response were evaluated. 78% patient had partial response, 15% had stable disease, and 6.3% of patient had complete response. Median interval between the end of CTRT and effective initiation of durvalumab was known for 161 patients. It was started within 14 days in 2.5% of patients, 14 to 42 days in 58% of patients, and more than 42 days of for 40% of patients. At the latest update of this data, the disease control rate was 74%. CR was seen in 10.5%, which is increased. PR is 20%, stable disease in 43%. So you can see the response rates 28% versus 16%. These responses were like that was observed in PACIFIC study. Despite almost 40% of patients started durvalumab even after 42 days after chemoradiation. So key takeaways, durvalumab demonstrated a statistically significant and meaningful improvement in OS and PFS versus placebo. Median OS was 47 months for durvalumab versus 29.1 months for placebo with a hazard ratio of 0.68. Median PFS 17.2 months versus 5.6 months. OS and PFS improvement was demonstrated across all pre-specified subgroups. 5-year overall survival was 42% as patient randomized to durvalumab remain alive at 5 years as compared to 33 with placebo. A 1/3 of patients remain both alive and disease-free, 33.1%, demonstrating OS benefit and PFS benefit with PACIFIC regime. Patient receiving durvalumab had a lower incidence of new lesions, including new brain metastases, compared with patients receiving placebo. That is 22.5% versus 33% in placebo group. 8% of patients received subsequent IO therapy compared with 22% of patients in placebo arm. Duration of treatment was shorter with greater than 50% of these patients receiving subsequent IO as second-line treatment and were diagnosed with metastatic disease. Tolerability profile of durvalumab was acceptable. Low-grade pneumonitis is not a deterrent to use of durvalumab. And in French trial, durvalumab was started more than 42 days after CRT, also in 40% of patients, and they showed similar responses to the one observed in PACIFIC trial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have a few questions and we have a few minutes as well. So can I request Naresh sir to please ask your question, sir? So just for want of time, I will just read Naresh Somani sir's question.
Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah,
I've read
perfect,
that.
sir. Please go ahead.
So usually I have not started before 42 days of, sorry.
So please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So I have not started actually before 6 weeks, but I think because they have started after 14 days also. So if patient is not having any radiation pneumonitis and we can get a CT scan done, rule out pneumonitis, I think patient is in good performance status, we can start early also.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll move on to the next session. Thank you so much, Deepak sir. Thank you so much, Sunil sir.
Thank you.
This session was sponsored by AstraZeneca. We'll move on to the next session. Our two chairpersons to the next session are Dr. K.R. Sharma, who is the head of Department General Medicine at Pacific Medical College and Hospital, Udaipur. And our second chairperson is Dr. Devendra Jain, Senior Consultant, Department of Surgical Oncology, Ananta Cancer Center, Udaipur. Over to you, sir. I now request Dr. K.R. Sharma to introduce our next speaker.
Yes. The next speaker is Dr. Deepak Shukla. He is consultant in Department of Medical Oncology, Manipal Hospital, Jaipur. I request Dr. Gupta and Dr. Shukla to take over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, can I share my slides? Just a minute.
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, so are my slides visible? Am I audible?
So your slides are visible and you're audible, sir.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Manoj, for giving me this opportunity to speak on the topic critical factors to consider while choosing treatment for EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer patient. So we have already discussed that we have moved from the traditional treatment based on the histology based subtyping and treating is based on the histology alone. And we have moved on to a more molecularly directed treatment. And this is particularly true for adenocarcinoma histology, where we have number of targets and approximately in 2021, we have close to 50% patients who can benefit from a molecularly directed treatment for advanced stage 4 adenocarcinoma. And the first molecular target which led the way towards this molecularly directed treatment was a EGFR mutation. And this mutation is seen based on the geographical place where the person is diagnosed. It varies from 20% to 50%. And somewhere it is at a lower percentage, close to 10%. So what do we know till now regarding the management of advanced stage non-small cell lung cancer with the EGFR mutation? We have a number of agents available for treatment. This is the 7th version of the 2021 NCCN guideline. The reason it is the 7th version, the treatment paradigm for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer and non-small cell lung cancer is changing so rapidly that in 21 itself, there have been 7 revisions till date. And we do not know that possibly even in the coming remaining 10 days, there can be one more upgradation. So what we do have available regarding treatment for EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer, the osimertinib is a category 1 as well as a preferred treatment based on this guideline. We have a number of other options available like erlotinib, afatinib, gefitinib, dacomatinib, and a combination of erlotinib with ramucirumab or erlotinib with bevacizumab. So just a brief look into what are these EGFR TKI. We are talking about generations. So we have 3 generations of TKI that target the EGFR receptor that has a mutation in it. So we have a first, second, and a third generation. The first generation EGFR inhibitors are reversible inhibitors. They have minimal ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, while the second generation EGFR inhibitors are irreversible inhibitor. The examples are afatinib and dacomatinib. And though these are active against the EGFR sensitizing classical mutations like exon 19 and 21, they do not have activity against the T790M mutation, but these are active against the atypical mutation. But again, they have minimal activity, or they rarely penetrate the blood-brain barrier. The third generation EGFR inhibitor is osimertinib. As previously discussed, this is has activity against T790M mutation. It is an irreversible inhibitor, and it has a significant ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. So the treatment over the last decade, we know that gefitinib and erlotinib revolutionized the treatment for EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer, and it has become a standard of care, surpassing the chemotherapy driven treatment that was given previously. Since then, we have a number of options and number of drugs available. So afatinib was compared to gefitinib. It showed improvement in progression-free survival, but did not show an overall survival. We have a second generation inhibitor other than afatinib, that is dacomatinib. And in one of these trials, it has shown improvement in PFS, but did not show improvement in overall survival. Osimertinib is a third generation EGFR TKI, which has inhibitor. It has shown both PFS and OS improvement based on the results of the FLORA trial. The other approved treatment or possible options that we consider while uh, treating a patients with these mutation is a combination of gefitinib with chemotherapy. And this data came from India itself, from TMH, also from a study from Japan. It showed improvement in PFS. Other combinations are erlotinib with bevacizumab and erlotinib and ramucirumab. And though they have shown improvement in PFS, but one of the trial has not shown overall survival benefit, and one trial, or the relay trial for the ramucirumab, is still awaited, or data is not matured for OS. So the decision in a clinic for a patient whom we are seeing with the EGFR mutation is based on a number of factors, and we'll be discussing that today. So we'll be discussing what are the critical factors for choosing EGFR mutation patients, TKI for the treatment of EGFR mutation non-small cell lung cancer, or TKI with a combination of chemotherapy, or which generation should we choose. So the type of the treatment we are choosing is, the first factor is the type of EGFR mutation. So this is the EGFR TKI gene, and the majority of the mutations that we see, what we talk about the classical mutations, occurring in close to 70 to 80% of the population in some data, and some previously when NGS was not used, these percentage was much higher, close to 88 to 90%. The exon 19 and exon 21 mutations are the classical mutations. The uncommon mutations are point mutations in the exon 18 to 21. There are mutations in the de novo T790M mutation alone or in combinations with other mutations, and the group 3 mutations, that is the exon 20 insertion. In addition, we can have compound mutation in which uncommon mutations are co-occurring with other common EGFR mutations. So coming to the treatment of classical EGFR mutation. So the classical EGFR mutation, as already mentioned, are the deletion 19 and L858R mutation. So over the last decade, we have learned that both these are TKI sensitive, both to the first to the third generation, but there is a definite difference in terms of outcome. And across the trial, we know that patients with deletion 19 do better as compared to the L858R mutation. And there are some suggestions, but again, there is no head-to-head comparison whether a second generation is better or a third generation is better. But what do we know till now? That only one trial, that is the FLORA trial of the osimertinib, has shown a overall survival benefit of close to 7 months as compared to the first generation TKI. The other non-classical mutation, or the group 1-2 mutations, which I mentioned previously, are insensitive towards the first generation EGFR TKI. The group 1 mutation, like the 3 mentioned here, constitute close to 80% of the group 1 mutation. And afatinib, based on the pooled analysis from the or a retrospective analysis from the LUX-Lung 2, 3, and 6 trial, showed a median PFS of close to 11 months in this trial as in these patients, and a median overall survival of close to 20 months. And the sensitivity of these mutations to this drug varies, as mentioned here. The clinical benefit of afatinib is lower in patients who are having a de novo T790M mutation or an exon 20 insertion mutation. Osimertinib, which is a third generation irreversible EGFR TKI inhibitor, so has shown in the phase 2 Korean trial, prospective trial in 36 patients, that it is also active in atypical mutations. And the sensitivity pattern is slightly different from what we see with afatinib. And also from the same study where afatinib was reported to have activity in the atypical mutation, close to 25 patients were have also received chemotherapy in this uncommon mutation. And we know that chemotherapy with pemetrexed and platinum do have activity. And possibly from the TMH data, gefitinib in combination with pemetrexed platinum could have an activity in these group 1 mutation. So what about the other uncommon EGFR mutation? What we know regarding the group 3 mutation, that is the EGFR exon 20 insertion, the best method to identify it is a DNA-based NGS. In present time, chemotherapy is still the preferred option. So this is one subset of patients of EGFR mutation where chemotherapy is still the first line treatment option. And when a patient is progressing in the second line, now the research have moved on. Now we have a number of active agents, as mentioned in the first talk, that amivantamab, mobocertinib, poziotinib, and osimertinib at a dose of 160 milligram are drugs that have shown activity in second line in this group 3 mutation. Coming to the patients with brain metastasis. So brain metastasis is very important in context of the treatment of EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer, because close to 50% of these patients either have or develop brain metastasis during the course of their treatment. And we do know that both first and second generation EGFR inhibitors have limited activity in brain metastasis, and their respective registrational trials excluded patients with brain metastasis. And the most active agents for active agent is osimertinib without doubt. And in the FLORA trial, 20% patients were having brain metastasis, and the CNS PFS, the hazard ratio was significant, and the median PFS was close to 16 months in osimertinib as compared to 10 months with the first generation gefitinib. So another critical factor which is discussed a lot amongst the oncology community per se is the importance of sequencing. So what do we mean by sequencing? So there has been suggestion that if a patient is treated with the first and second generation EGFR TKI, then when they are developing a EGFR T790M mutation, to use osimertinib in second line could offer a better survival instead of using the osimertinib in first line. And geotag study is often quoted as an evidence to it. What we do know that this study showed a median overall survival close to 41.3 months, but this study was a retrospective observational analysis. It excluded patients who were having T790M or who were not tested, or the patients who had died in the first line treatment with afatinib or could not receive any second line therapy. And also this was enriched for deletion 19 mutation, close to 75%. And to be enrolled, they have to receive osimertinib for more than 10 months before enrollment, and shorter duration treatment patients were excluded. And in this trial, the treatment time to treatment failure was an endpoint in which the treatment is given beyond progression, and overall survival was an exploratory endpoint. So it is not possible at this point that this strategy it is better in comparison to using of the third generation osimertinib upfront. So it is not possible to predict which patients will benefit from the geotag sequence at the time of treatment initiation. And what we know that when we are starting with 10 patients in the first line, 7 out of these patients will who start on a first or a second generation EGFR will not be able to receive osimertinib in second line. And we do not know at the time of treatment initiation that which patients will develop this resistance mechanism. So coming to the toxicity consideration. So whatever being said that outcomes of the treatment of EGFR mutation non-small cell lung cancer have improved, but still the treatment remains palliative. So the toxicity consideration and quality of life is key when we are treating these patients. So looking into the toxicity profile. So the incidence of any grade skin reaction, paronychia, diarrhea is more common with second generation TKI, though it is a class effect of all EGFR inhibitors, but the incidence and the grade 3-4 events are much higher in the second generation TKI. Prolonged QT interval, decreased ejection fraction is more common with osimertinib, but in majority of the cases, it is reversible on stopping the drug. Transaminitis is more common with gefitinib. There have been rare case reports of liver dysfunction of fatal hepatotoxicity in patients with underlying liver dysfunction when treated with erlotinib. And ocular toxicity is more common with the first generation EGFR TKI. One particular side effect, that is pneumonitis, it is a class effect of EGFR TKI and can be seen with the any available EGFR TKI and possibly more so with osimertinib. But there is some suggestion from the Japanese trial that possibly addition of bevacizumab to a first generation EGFR TKI may decrease its incidence. And one of the options we discussed in the treatment of a newly diagnosed patients is chemotherapy with gefitinib. In such setting, hematological toxicity is more common. And across the trials, what we have seen, discontinuation rates is more when the combination strategy, either if it is a bevacizumab with erlotinib or chemotherapy with gefitinib, it is more commonly seen. So coming to the other miscellaneous consideration, so the financial consideration, though in the clinical setting, this is the most important parameter in day-to-day practice, which is deciding our treatment. And possibly in such a setting, pemetrexed carboplatin with gefitinib is an alternative. And in a few patients, particularly as discussed for atypical mutations, and in some patients, even a single agent first generation inhibitor could be an option because of the financial constraint. And one important point one must keep into consideration that for patients who have received immunotherapy, either because they did not have the previous NGS or a molecular marker report suggesting of EGFR mutation, and then if they go on to receive the EGFR TKI, then there are increased chances of developing an immune related adverse events, and particularly pneumonitis. So it is advisable to stop the drug or not to give TKI for approximately 3 months to avoid this side effect. And based on from the reference from up to date, in such setting, erlotinib could be a preferred TKI instead of the other TKIs that we have discussed. So to summarize my talk, what we have discussed, that the only EGFR TKI which has shown both improved progression-free survival as well as overall survival is osimertinib, and that is why, based on this, the ESMO guidelines has given it a magnitude of clinical benefit score of 4, and possibly in our Indian setting, where often a cost is a constraint, possibly the next best option from the data we have from TMH could be gefitinib with pemetrexed carboplatin, and patients with rare atypical mutations can be given afatinib. And sequencing, if at all it is selected, then possibly patients with exon 19 mutation could be good candidates. So to summarize the talk, the osimertinib is the only EGFR TKI that has demonstrated clinically and statistically significant improvement in overall survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll move on to our next session. Can I request Dr. Devendra Jain to please introduce our next speaker? Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. May I request Dr. Lalit Sharma, sir, to attain and deliver, enlighten us with his thought about this molecular changes which is happening. Though I am a surgical oncologist, I have got very less idea about this. But good evening, sir. Please, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Manoj, for giving me this opportunity. I hope my slides are visible and I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible and the slides are visible.
So, basically, our topic of discussion for today's evening is non-small cell lung carcinoma, and as we all know, it is a comparatively slower growing tumor as compared to the small cell carcinoma, and it has a very varied objective response rate according to the driver mutation, which is actually underlying this particular disorder. So it's a basically group of disorders, not a single disease, and it was very well elaborated by Dr. Deepak in the previous talk, that each and every in the previous talks, we did come to know that it is basically the underlying molecular pathology which is actually going to drive individual tumor, and the outcomes depend on the targeted therapies which we choose, and along with the additional subsequent therapies which we choose. So this accounts for the majority of the lung cancers. Up to 80 to 85% are the non-small cell carcinomas. Majority of the patients are elderly. Metastasis, though, as compared to small cell carcinoma, occurs late, but more than 50% and a substantial number in our setting have distant metastasis at the outset itself. So the treatment landscape is changing very rapidly, and as is evident from the frequent revisions in the treatment guidelines which are available with us, whether be it NCCN or any other guidelines, that the landscape changes almost every month or quarter, and it was very well pointed out that it might change even in the week or 10 days, which are yet to come even in this particular year. So initially the demarcation was made only between whether it is a small cell or a non-small cell pathology. The treatment used to be only platinum compounds, and then came the era of doublets. Around in the mid of the 90s, and as the millennium approached, histology-based therapies were chosen based on whether the patient had an adeno or squamous cell carcinoma. Then in the first decade of this millennium, we started looking at the revolution which occurred in the management of the lung carcinoma, where we started identifying the individual molecular pathology which was underlying these particular tumors, which were deriving the oncogenesis in these particular tumors, and the targeted therapies started playing a significant role, and the treatment landscape changed like anything. The treatment outcomes improved, and by the later half of the previous decade, that is 2015 onwards, we started having multiple immuno-oncology drugs being developed and being used in the clinical settings. So most of the initial studies for the immuno-oncology drugs were targeted towards studying their effect in the second line setting or in the subsequent setting. Most of the studies evaluating these individual molecules, be it nivolumab, pembrolizumab, or atezolizumab, did show us that they are pretty effective as compared to the standard of care second line chemotherapeutic agents. Gradually, over the period of time, we came to know that the subsequent studies told us that probably they are also equally effective in the first line setting also. So at this point in time, if we would like to summarize what is the treatment landscape is, so the histology would kind of direct us towards the chemotherapeutic backbone which we are going to use, but moreover it would be dependent on the underlying molecular pathology. So if a particular tumor is positive for any baseline underlying molecular pathology, targeted therapy towards that particular pathology, be it an EGFR mutation, ALK or ROS or c-MET mutation, is the treatment of choice. But in patients who are mutation negative, the therapy would to some extent be guided by the PD-L1 expression. Patients who have a very strong PD-L1 expression probably would benefit with single agent or monotherapy with immuno-oncology drugs, and the patients who have slightly lesser PD-L1 expression might be considered for a immuno-oncology and chemotherapeutic drug combination. So going ahead on the same road, basically IMpower 150 was a study which was designed to gain a peek into the possibility of combining atezolizumab along with bevacizumab and chemotherapy in the first line setting for a non-small cell carcinoma. So basically the investigators had a proposition or had a rationale that in addition to its anti-angiogenic effect, bevacizumab inhibits the vascular endothelial growth factor, and it has an immune modulatory effect also. Now, this inhibition of VEGF can promote T cell priming and activation via the dendritic cell maturation. And tumor cell killing by the chemotherapeutic component may expose the immune system to higher levels of the cancer antigens. Now, this normalization of the tumor vasculature through vascular endothelial growth factor inhibition increases the T cell tumor infiltration. VEGF blockade can establish an immune permissive tumor microenvironment also by decreasing myeloid-derived suppressor cells and regulatory T population. So all these factors combined, they would promote atezolizumab mediated T cell cancer cell killing, and this could enhance the bevacizumab based reversal of the VEGF mediated immunosuppression also. So this was the basic rationale behind taking up this particular study. So it was a phase 3 study which included stage 4 or recurrent metastatic non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer chemotherapy naive patients. So this also included patients who were either intolerant of the EGFR therapy, the molecular target based therapy, or had kind of progressed on those. Or the tumor tissue needed to be available for biomarker assessment, and a PD-L1 assessment was done by the IHC. The patients were stratified on the basis of gender, the extent of PD-L1 expression, and whether the patient had a liver metastasis or not. The patients were randomized into 3 arms. The arm A had atezolizumab along with the chemotherapeutic arm component of paclitaxel and carboplatin, which was common to all the 3 arms. Arm B had a combination of atezolizumab and bevacizumab along with chemotherapy, and arm C, which was considered to be the control arm, had bevacizumab along with chemotherapy. In each arm, the atezolizumab or the combination was considered for maintenance after 4 to 6 cycles of the first line therapy. The response assessment was done on the RECIST version 1.1. The intent to treat patients were randomized into wild type and mutated patients, be it EGFR, ALK, or ROS. The majority of the patients were of wild type. These were further divided into T effector gene signature on the basis of T effector gene signature expression. This was considered to be a surrogate for PD-L1 expression. Almost around 45% patients were high T effector gene signature. That is, they had a higher expression of the PD-L1, and almost half of them had a low PD-L1 expression. The primary objectives of the study were considered to be the PFS in the wild type patients and PFS in the T effector high wild type patients, and overall survival in all the patients. The key secondary objectives were PFS in the and overall survival in all the patients, and PFS in the PD-L1 IHC subgroups also, along with objective response rates, duration of response, and the safety profile of the drug. So as far as baseline characteristics were considered, all the 3 arms were pretty well matched for either gender or performance score. The only differences slight differences which we could find were in the EGFR mutation positive patients, which was slightly more in the control arm, around 5% vis-a-vis in the experimental arm, which were 3%, almost kind of double in the control arm. Moreover, KRAS mutated patients were slightly more in the experimental arm. So on the completion of the study, what the investigators found was that the atezolizumab combination extended the median overall survival to 8.3 months, median overall survival to 8.3 months versus 6.8 months in the observer arm, and it was backed with a robust hazard ratio of 0.59. So overall survival was also extended at 24 months. The overall survival was 19.2 months for the experimental arm versus 14.7 months in the observational arm. Now, this overall survival benefit was further kind of even maintained at the updated analysis, which had a median follow-up of 39.8 months. So this particular study met both the co-primary endpoints of the progression-free survival also and the overall survival, though the hazard ratio was more significant for the progression-free survival. Now, the another co-primary endpoints, that is the objective response rate, was also far better with the combination therapy, wherein in the overall population, 56% patients responded on the combination, whereas only 41% responded in the chemotherapy and bevacizumab arm. Now, this response rate was far better in patients who had a higher PD-L1 expression also, where it reached up to the extent of around 70%. So while considering for treatment decisions in the first-line metastatic non-small cell carcinoma, we always consider the patient characteristics such as performance status, comorbidities, whether the patient has a CNS metastasis or not, and what is the overall tumor burden, whether the patient has liver mets or not. Biomarker analysis definitely is the most important guiding factor. Any patient having a molecular pathology needs to subjected to targeted therapies. Patients who have higher expression to PD-L1 are expected are expected to respond better to the immuno-oncology drugs. Along with that, we need to keep in mind the patient's wishes, the physician's preference, and the logistic aspects also, that is the financial aspect. So what are the other factors which we need to consider other than these commonly used parameters? One is whether the individual patient has a liver metastasis or not. As most all of us would agree that a patient with liver metastasis has a poorer prognosis because they are bound to have other site metastasis also. The disease volume is usually more, and their tolerability towards the therapeutic agents is less. But in IM power 150, the investigators observed that the patients with liver metastasis did really well on the at atezolizumab, bevacizumab, and chemotherapeutic combination. In fact, they did better than the no liver metastasis patients. And the hazard ratio for the overall survival was in the favor of the combination. And the other consideration is in the patients who are EGFR positive and have been exposed to the EGFR TKIs. So these patients usually respond initially to the TKIs, but they inevitably relapse, and their response to the chemotherapeutic agents is usually not that robust. These patients, when they were considered in this, have been considered in the various trials that we have seen that the subsequent therapies, they work less as compared to the their EGFR wild type counterparts. In this particular study, what they found was that the PFS curves separated at around 6 months in the and there was a significant improvement in the median overall survival for these patients also, wherein the median overall progression-free survival was 9.7 months for the experimental arm versus only 6.1 months in the observational arm. Overall survival benefit was also seen in this particular setting, wherein the overall survival was at around 29.4 months compared to 18 months in the only bevacizumab and chemotherapeutic arm. So overall response rate and duration of response was also higher in the atezolizumab, bevacizumab, and chemotherapeutic arm. It increased from 42% to 71% in the experimental arm. So, but all these responses, these advantages in the progression-free survival and overall survival, they came at a cost, and these costs were the adverse events. The serious adverse events were more in the combination arms, to the tunes of that grade 5 adverse event, that is the mortality was almost double in the experimental arm, in the tunes of 2.5% in the atezolizumab and chemotherapeutic arm versus 6.1% in the triplet arm. Though as compared to bevacizumab and chemotherapy arm, it was more or less the same. The side effects which could be attributed to the immuno-oncology drug, that is atezolizumab, were commonly either pneumonitis, hepatitis, or colitis, the usual side effects of the immunotherapeutic drugs. So to conclude, IM Power 150 was a positive study in the first-line non-squamous, non-small cell lung carcinoma with statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in both co-primary endpoints, that is the overall survival and PFS, for the atezolizumab, bevacizumab, and chemotherapy in the favor of the combination. The clinical benefit was observed in all key subgroups, be it EGFR allogenomic alterations or in patients with liver metastasis also. Additional patient characteristics beyond PD-L1 expression may be considered while choosing this particular combination, specifically liver mets and EGFR mutation, which showed these subgroups showed substantially more improvement, and the overall hazard ratio was far better in these particular subsets. The higher objective response rate was also seen in these particular subsets. Thank you so much for a patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have some questions in the chat box. So can I request you to answer them?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll now move on to our next session. Our two chairpersons of the next session are Dr. Poonam Patil, who is a senior consultant, Department of Medical Oncology at Manipal Hospital, Bangalore. And our second chairperson is Dr. Sadashivru Kundeti, who is the head of department and additional professor, Department of Medical Oncology at NIMS Hospital, Hyderabad. Over to you, sir and ma'am.
Yeah. Good evening. Good evening, madam. Yeah.
Good evening to you all.
Yeah, good evening, and everyone. Just thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to chair this session, and really wonderful session is going on. Now, just I'll like to invite our moderator as well as our panel members. Okay. The moderator is Dr. Naresh Somani. He is the head of Department of Medical Oncology, HCG Cancer Center, and Director of Oncology, Somani Hospital, Jaipur. And Dr. Coming to our panel members, I think there are eminent panel members from different parts of the country. Dr. Ramesh Puranik, medical oncologist from Pune. Dr. Chaitanya, Krishna Chaitanya actually, okay, the medical oncologist from Hyderabad. Dr. Akhil Kapoor, medical oncologist from Varanasi. Dr. Kripa Bajaj, medical oncologist from Hyderabad. Dr. Shruti Kate, medical oncologist from Nashik. Dr. Vikas Telraja, medical oncologist from Kanpur. Dr. Holis D'Souza, medical oncologist from Mumbai. So we have so many eminent panelists and a very good moderator we have. So now we will go to this moderator. So the session is Insights in Stage 4 Non-Small Cell Lung Cancer. Over to you, Dr. Naresh Somani, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thanks to organizers, Dr. Manoj Mahajan and others, to give me this wonderful opportunity. Am I audible and visible? My slides are visible?
Yes, sir, you're audible and the slides are visible.
Okay, so I have just prepared the few of the slides and I have not prepared any case. So as I have been told that the discussion is more for the pulmonologist, for the oncologist, for the surgeon, for the radiation oncologist and the other our respected colleagues. So I thought that let us have some discussion, their views, their insights, their wisdom, that what they think of immuno-oncology drugs used in the stage 3 and 4. And one of my previous speakers, Dr. Deepak Gupta, has covered the immuno-oncology in stage 3 especially the Pacific trial. So with that background, let's have the insight. And as we all understand that non-small cell lung cancer is not the one disease. We previously used to take the patient based on the histopathology. Then we moved to the molecular target therapy for the certain druggable mutations. And now is the era for the chemo plus minus immuno-oncology or immuno-oncology in the first line for certain subgroup of the patient. So this is how the things are moving. And especially for the driver mutation positive patient, we all know about the success story, and many driver mutations are being added in this thing. So similar to the driver mutation positive patient where the beautiful markers are available, the biomarkers for the initial use of the immunotherapy in NSCLC is always a big challenge, and there are probably the limited markers available. So here I would like to have the wisdom of our panelists, that when they handle the tissue in initial setting, and what are the biomarkers for the immunotherapy they keep in the mind and they try to evaluate. So let's start with the Dr. Resma Puranik from the Pune first. That for the immuno-oncology use in the first line, what biomarkers she usually advise on the tissue?
Good evening, sir. So for specifically using immunotherapy, I would like to consider PDL1 basically, and it is done on IHC by the PharmC22 test. And PDL1 is one marker which I consider doing whenever there is a first patient comes in the first line setting of metastatic non-small cell, besides the other biomarkers.
So do you consider the total mutation burden in the first line?
No, sir. PDL1 for me is sufficient, sir. PDL1, as long as I get a PDL1 report, it is sufficient for me.
So anybody else from the panelists would like to comment on my specific question regarding the TMB and its utility in the first line? If no, let's move to the further. So based on the PDL1, as Dr. Resma just commented, that yes, is the probably the most important markers. And PDL1, I would like to share with all my colleagues, those who are joining here, that we see the value as a negative or less than 1 to 49, 50 or more than the 50%. So based on this report, Dr. Hollis, how you would like to choose your patient? A typical metastatic stage 4 patient where brain mets are not there. Maybe the lung mets, the contralateral lung mets are there, few limited liver mets are there, and the predominantly bone mets are there. So based on the PDL1 and based on the other markers or the performance status and the tumor burden in the body, not the TMB, tumor burden in the body, how you choose the chemotherapy, chemo plus immunotherapy or single agent immunotherapy. I think that is the basic point for our discussion today. So, so start with the Dr. D'Souza.
Yeah, thank you, Naresh sir. So the algorithm is simple. The PDL1 more than 50%, high disease burden. I'm going with Pembro plus some sort of chemotherapy, pemetrexed carbo or paclitaxel. PDL1 more than 50, low disease burden. I'm going with Pembro alone. PDL1 1 to 49, I'm going with Pembro plus chemotherapy. Less than 1%, I'm not very convinced for Pembro, so I go with chemotherapy. I reserve immunotherapy in the second line, development in the second line for such patient.
So, Dr. Chaitanya, would you like to comment that how you choose the immunotherapy in the first line, especially when the patient is quite symptomatic, you want to use the drugs immediately and all the driver mutation reports are not available. You want to start with the immunotherapy or you want to start only with the chemotherapy, because especially when the PDL1 report is available within 2 or 3 days along with the histopathology. So how you select the patient?
Sir, a symptomatic patient and where the driver mutation testing is still pending, I would go ahead with a chemotherapy, not immuno or combination of immuno with chemotherapy. I will just give 1 dose of chemotherapy and wait for the driver mutation testing, because we know that there is a lot of evidence that.
So my patient is having the report of the adenocarcinoma, and along with the TTF1 and NAPSIN and this all report, the PDL1 report is also showing something like 80%, 90%. So don't you have the temptation to start with the immunotherapy?
No, sir, I will go with the evidence. I'll wait for the driver mutation testing. I will give chemotherapy 1 cycle and wait for the driver mutation testing, as the evidence shows that if they have a driver mutation positive, whatever the PDL1 result is, the immunotherapy won't work in these cases.
So the message is very clear that the immunotherapy in the first line is useful only when the driver mutations, all actionable driver mutations, including the expanding list of the driver mutation like the BRAF, MET and RET and ROS1 and everything is negative, then only probably it's a good to go for the immunotherapy in this particular setting. So, and the potential toxicity of the immunotherapy followed by the TKI, we all now understand, especially with the third generation drugs like the osimertinib. And this has also been well covered by the previous speaker, Dr. Deepak Shukla. So now coming to the immunotherapy once again, and I think the stage 3 unresectable patient where we give the chemotherapy, radiotherapy followed by the consolidation. So how do you select the patient in your clinical practice? I want to know from you to give the message clear cut to the audience that a patient who is having the EGFR mutation positive and a patient who is having the PDL1 negative. So can I ask this question to Dr. Talreja, Vikas Talreja from Kanpur, our good friend, stage 3 patient, completed chemoradiotherapy. Patient has shown the good partial response. So based on the EGFR report and based on the negative PDL1 report or the PDL1 report, how do you select the patient for the durvalumab?
So, sir, the criteria is only to start for durvalumab as a maintenance. No doubt, we have given durvalumab to many patients as a maintenance, and those who are mutation driven positive, they are the first one who fail in this setting, and that's why my prediction would be that we will do a mutation testing. Even though it's a stage 3, we don't have the data for an adjuvant post CTRT, and durvalumab is for maintenance for all these patients. But we'll do mutation testing because we know in retrospect that we have given around 20-25 patients durvalumab when it was available as a compassionate basis, that those who are mutation driven, they fail miserably with the durvalumab maintenance. So durvalumab maintenance for all, but do the mutation testing and also carefully select those with mutation driven, probably not to waste their money on that.
So Dr. Akhil Kapoor, do you agree with this, that if my patient by any region is known to have the EGFR mutation positive and durvalumab is given, and at the time of the progression, suppose my patient is affordable and I want to give him the osimertinib, do you think it's the right scenario for the patient? Dr. Akhil Kapoor is with us?
It seems that he's logged out, so we'll just try to get him back.
So may I request this question to be taken by the Dr. Kripa Bajaj?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Naresh, sir, for the question. So as such, there is no evidence for maintenance osimertinib post CTRT. So definitely, I agree with my other panelists. Patient is EGFR positive, durvalumab is not going to benefit much. But giving TKI like osimertinib, there is no such strong evidence to suggest osimertinib in such patients.
And Dr. Shruti, can I ask you that in the PDL negative patient in stage 3, would you have the temptation to go for the durvalumab in the consolidation?
Sir, that's a very tricky situation. So usually we don't do PDL1, and we would actually, irrespective of the PDL1 value, the guidelines say that we are supposed to offer durvalumab to the patient. I have done PDL1 testing just in order to, maybe in the private practice, is to give that what is the derived benefit from that for that patient depending on the PDL1 value, because the benefit is definitely different for negative or positive patients, and the degree of positivity also. So by chance, for the patient whom I did, it was 100% positive, so I was able to convince the patient that it is very strongly going to benefit you. But because there is no other option for a stage 3 patient, it is not advisable to not offer durvalumab if the PDL1 is negative or low. That is how I would want to counsel the patient. There is nothing else that you can do, and I would just offer it. I mean, for an affording patient, I would not hold back. If by unfortunately patient has done the PDL1 and you know that it is negative, I would still tell the patient that, you know, this is the only thing right now which can offer him any benefit. So rather than just waiting for the dismal prognosis.
Let's move further. And we all have heard about the specific trial, its improvement, and previous speaker has covered. And the trial says that irrespective of the PDL1 status and irrespective of the EGFR, probably the both groups of the patients are benefited. But yes, we understand the limitations of the various things. And a few words about the immune-related side effects. Especially to the audience, we would like to give the message when, especially in a common practice where we use the immunotherapy drug as a single agent in the second line, how to monitor the patient apart from the hematological toxicity, what are the non-hematological toxicity in the common scenario in a practical day-to-day manner, and how to go for that. Let's start again with the Dr. Chaitanya Krishna.
Yes, sir. A case on immunotherapy, we should be very cautious about each and every symptom what they get, whether it's a disease related or immunotherapy related, especially the endocrine toxicities and autoimmune toxicities, what we commonly see like pneumonitis, hepatitis, or colitis. And if it is like in combination with the chemotherapy, we would definitely see for other toxicities of chemo as well, depending on the agent. And based on the grade of the toxicities, we should be able to manage at the right time so that we won't lose the case because of toxicities.
So when the immunotherapy were being introduced, the sentence was given that if you are not a good internist, if you don't have all the ICU facilities, probably you are not the right person to choose the immunotherapy. So does this sentence hold true as on today with our experience of 4 to 5 years of using the immunotherapy? Dr. Shruti, do you agree with this, or it's a very mild drug?
I totally agree with this, sir, because I mean, you cannot suddenly become a good intensivist when the toxicity happens. I am sure why you're asking is that the toxicities are rare, but when they happen, if you do not manage it well, you will lose the patient who has spent lakhs and a salvageable patient. So I totally agree that you have to be right person to be handling the immunotherapy, definitely.
Yeah. So Dr. Hollis, quickly, would you like to tell us that what are the ways to monitor these toxicity? What are the tests you run frequently to see the endocrine toxicity and other non-hematological toxicity?
Yes, sir,
Dr. Hollis.
Yeah, so one piece of caution that I always ask my residents and the physicians who are dealing with my patients is no antibiotics inadvertently to any of my patients on immunotherapy, no steroids inadvertently to any of my patients on immunotherapy. No steroids are pre-medication also.
Very good. Yeah.
Follow up.
Yeah, please go on. Go on. Please continue, Dr. Hollis. Please continue. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
So I think
So let's move to the next. And we have, I think, covered this. So when we choose these drugs in advanced NSC, LC, we keep the various factors in the mind, like the patient-related characteristic, disease-related characteristic, histology, possibility of the bleeding, like cavitary lesions or closed lesion to the vessels, presence of the targetable mutation, PDL1 expression, patient-related factors, health condition, financial things, and the previous history of the autoimmune disease and transplant and so on. And coming back to the same thing, so in the first line, when there is no issue of the finance, in a given scenario, a good general condition patient, 3 things come in my mind. That is the chemo plus immunotherapy, chemo plus maybe pembrolizumab as immunotherapy, chemo plus Tecentriq as chemo plus immunotherapy, or IO plus IO as the nivolumab plus ipilimumab. So what are your preferences? How do you select the patient in your clinical practice? And I think that Dr. Vikas Talreja will give us the insight about this, that in this crowded scenario where the chemo plus immunotherapy, a lot of options are available. How do you select your patient for first line in PD-L1 positive patient? Dr. Vikas?
I'm sorry, I was on mute, sir. So the first reason for selection for a patient with immunotherapy is the finances. Always the first thing we always look at the patient, whether the patient is affordable for the same. And if affordability is not an issue, definitely PD-L1 do serve as a marker. As if the patient has a more than PD-L1 50%, we go for the pembrolizumab. The simple reason being because pembrolizumab was available with us for a long time. We had a fair good of experience, and we had a good hands-on experience for the same. We also that the second the Nivo plus the EP combination in more than PD-L1 50% patient do tend to have a similar data, but again the experience of ipilimumab is with few and far more toxicities, especially in terms of the diarrheas. In those with PD-L1 between 1 to 49%, the preference is to combine the chemo and the IOs, but it always depends upon the patient's comorbidities, the disease burden, and also the fitness level of the patient, as whether he's fit for the chemos or he's totally unfit for the chemos. Also, when we try to do we try to give the IOs, we also tend to do simultaneously NGS testing to find out that whether we are missing from the traditional testing of our EGFR, ALK, ROS as any other biomarkers that could have been a potential target or could have been a reason for the failure of the immunotherapies. So we always tend to, because if the patient is affordable for the immunotherapies, he's always affordable for those NGS tests also. So a broader gene panel at the same point of time is always advisable to find out whether the same, we are not missing on some things, because many times the tissue is not adequate for the traditional testing. The report is there, sometimes the bone samples are there. So it does tend to make a difference. And for less than 1% PD-L1 status, again, Nivo plus EP has a good data. That would be my preference for those patients who are immuno eligible and chemo ineligible. My preference would be to change to give Nivo EP only in those with a PD-L1 less than 50%, less than 1%.
Thanks, Dr. Vikas. So, Dr. Akhil Kapoor has joined us. Is he available? If not, then I come back to Resma Puranik once again, that in what scenario where the PD-L1 is not 50% or more, it is something like 1 to 49%, maybe even less than 1%. Do you consider single agent immunotherapy over the combination chemotherapy or over the chemotherapy? In what scenario you consider for that?
Sir, if the PD-L1 expression, like you said, is less than 1 or 1 to 49%, only in those patients who I feel are chemotherapy not tolerant and they are in a poor performance status, comorbidities, then only I would prefer a single agent pembro. Otherwise, no, sir. Otherwise, a combination only in this subset.
So from this platform, we would like to give the message that yes, even single agent IO can be used even without having more than 50%, where we feel that the chemotherapy probably will not be the suitable for the individual patient. Does this all the panelists agree with this statement?
Sir, Krishna Chaitanya
in
here.
this setting, I'm sorry. Sir, in this setting, there is a good evidence regarding Nivo plus ipilimumab combination. So I would like to go with CheckMate 227 trial data. So in patients who are not having poor performance status, if I want to offer only IO alone, I will offer the combination of Nivo plus EP rather than offering only single agent pembrolizumab.
Sir, Krishna Chaitanya here. So first of all, PDL1 is a continuous and dynamic variable. We can't depend on these percentages, and the level what we get, it's like very artificial. It can change over a period of time. And secondly, wherever there is like 1 to 49% of the PDL1 positivity, like if you consider like 40% and all, they almost like they almost behave like whatever the patient is responding more than 50% of the PDL1. And as the other panelists also mentioned that more than 1% of PDL1 we have a good data with Nivo and EP. But wherever the 1 to 49% case is there, and we have a subgroup analysis where it is equivalent to chemotherapy. So when you are not able to give the combination, definitely we can give a single agent pembrolizumab, where the overall survival is 13 months versus 12 months with a single agent pembro with chemo. So I would prefer single agent pembrolizumab wherever we are not able to give the combination.
So in the background of the IM power 1110, I think there are the two drugs now, the pembro or atezolizumab are available as single agent with us, especially in the high PDL1 status. So do you find any ways to select the one over the other, or it's simply the preference of the user? Anyone can talk about this question.
So this
So
single agent.
we are having. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please go ahead.
So most of us had a very good experience with pembrolizumab, and all of us.
Yes, please go ahead. Dr. Kripa, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Most of us had a very good experience with pembrolizumab, so all of us are comfortable using pembrolizumab. But looking at IM power 110, atezolizumab is a very promising agent to offer as a single agent. So either is fine, but pembrolizumab, we all are having a very good experience.
Sir, apart from that, and both the studies have shown a very good hazard ratios with the pembrolizumab rather than with Tecentriq. So, and the experience and the evidence, I think everyone would prefer pembro.
Any difference in the toxicity, do you feel so, between the two as single agent?
So
no,
little bit transaminitis, I feel it's more in atezolizumab compared to pembrolizumab. But otherwise, both are having equal profile, equally safety profile.
So that's another agent available, I think, and can be used in the subset of the patients. And we have the various cross-trial comparisons about the single agent, especially in the high risk. And we have discussed, I think, chemo plus IO in the first line also. And in the last, may I request each and every panelist to give the one sentence from their side regarding the use of the immunotherapy in the first line in metastatic NSCLC. Let's start first with the Dr. Hollis. Dr. D'Souza, please.
Yes, sir. So one line statement, more than 50% pembro, 1 to 49 pembro plus chemo. So it depends on the finances. But I don't push for IO in the first line for most of my patients. They're not from I'm not dealing with a lot of CJS patients. So I push for Nivo in the second line rather than a pembro in the first line.
Dr. Reshma.
Sir, almost I agree totally with Hollis, sir. More than 50% is a single agent pembrolizumab, which I prefer because having more experience of using pembro, not really used Tecentriq a lot. And sir, for me, the 4-drug combination of atezoli, bev, and paclicarbo, I find it a little difficult because most of the patients which we get are not in that much of a good performance status for using this 4-drug combination. And for the patients with 1 to 49% chemo-immuno combination, and I have no experience in using Nivo EP as of now. So,
Dr. Shruti, you have any different opinion, or you would like to go with the previous statements?
I would go. Also, now in non-squamous histology, paclicarbo, bev plus Nivo has some data. Though the OS data is not mature, but that is also one option that is coming up irrespective of the PDL1. So that.
And Dr. Chaitanya, once again, your wisdom.
Sir, I still feel the PDL1 we shouldn't take these percentages as the cut marks. We should still consider it's a dynamic marker. Wherever the patient is eligible for a immunotherapy, that means not having autoimmune disease and no contraindications for immunotherapy, we should push them for chemotherapy with immunotherapy because it works well irrespective of the PDL1 status. And if they are not fit enough for the chemotherapy, definitely immunotherapy would be a option wherever there is like positive PD-L1, and the others would be just the chemotherapy. And still, I feel these people do bad because all the studies have shown only 2 years of survival. Wherever the driver mutation is not there, I consider all of them as a poor prognostic patients.
And Dr. Vikas, the final concluding remark from your side regarding the IO. Dr. Vikas. So I think he's not getting connected right now. And with this, I would like to thank all the panelists and to give us their views about the insight and the various concepts of that, how the immunotherapy are working in the, especially in the first line in stage 3 and 4. And back to the organizers. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Somani. It was great seeing you, and it was a very good moderated session and a very interactive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Naresh sir. Thank you to the chairpersons, Poonam ma'am and Sadashivdu sir. And thank you to all the panelists. With that, we'll move on to the last part of the session. I now invite our program director, Dr. Manoj Mahajan, who is the director and senior consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, Pacific Medical College and Hospital, Udaipur, to please give the conclusion and the take-home message. Over to you, sir.
Am I audible?
Sir, you're audible and visible, sir.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Mahajan.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank all respected seniors and colleagues who have given their valuable time, and all the sponsors for the organizing this wonderful updates in lung cancer. To my audience, I would like to give the visible changes which we could see in last 10 years, decade back. 5-year survival for lung cancer was barely like less than 5% in stage 4, especially. Now we are reaching up to 25% survival, 5-year survival, plus in certain tyrosine kinase targeted drugs where it is reaching more than that. So I think the new era, we need to approach cautiously in terms of managing the finances, but the data emerging is quite promising in terms of prolonging survival of the patients. So I would like to give explicit message to all our audiences that, as most of the panelists, speakers and moderator have explained, how this new era of precision medicine and new era of immunotherapy is changing survival. That is the new future. Probably we are not yet here to replace the chemotherapy, but in combination with the chemotherapy, and hoping that we'll improve upon that also, and give a very good survival and quality of life to most of our patients. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Mark.